Okay, hello guys. Yesterday I posted a video demonstrating how I set up my liquidity pool, and today I want to go over some more details about how exactly does Uniswap v3 manages liquidity, or I should say, what you need to understand before you set up a liquidity. So let me quickly go over Uniswap's blog post about V3. It is fairly new, so it's understandable that quite a few of you, including myself, are not that familiar with this, as opposed to the more common one in other exchanges where you cover the whole ranges, which is what Uniswap V2 was doing. So the main difference about V3 is that it gives you the ability to put a concentrated liquidity, meaning you can set a closed interval for your liquidity. And for the fees, well, most of the people say to 1% for M, so I don't think we need to worry about that too much. And one thing to know that is here, liquidity providers and liquidity provider can basically sell or buy a specific asset by setting up liquidity above or below the current price. If you put it above, you'll be selling that asset, and if you put it below, then you'll be buying that asset when price drops. So one way to put it is you can think of it as a fee earning limit order that executes along a smooth curve where you are not selling or buying at a particular price, but you'll be constantly selling or buying when price increases or drops. Okay, so just gonna quickly show you the pool I set up yesterday. So after 24 hours, you earn about 6.3%. I think that is pretty good, even though the trading value is only 40 million. But most of the time, it is within the range I set up. Although mostly it's fluctuating between 69 to 78, but I say it's not bad. So I'll keep it running for a little more until have um, we are confident staying above 80, I guess. So now let me switch over to white paper. And the reason is I really want to show a more clear example about mainly about the ratio between the two currencies. Well, the pair you'll be putting into liquidity and what exactly the risk there is. Even though I talk a lot in the 13-minute video one, but I didn't really talk about a specific example. So let's consider an example so that you can better understand um, what you would expect when you set up a liquidity pool. So let's say, again, I'm just going to talk about MM with USDC. Oops, MM, USDC. The reason is that this one is our largest liquidity pool. Most people, um, if you swap Ethereum with MM or USD with MM, they all go through. You'll always be swapping Ethereum to USDC and USDC to MM. So yeah. So let's say I want to set up a liquidity pool with the pair MM with USDC. Now let's say the current price is 100, just for easy calculations. If I want to sell a liquidity where the maximum will be plus 10% to the current price and minus 10% to the current price, then effectively I'm setting up my range from 90 to 110, right? Now, because it the distance between the maximum and current price is the same as the distance from minimum to current price. So you will be required to put in equal amount of NM and USDC. And equal amount, I mean, they all have to be the same value, underlying value. So I'll be putting 50-50 for the two assets. If I put 1 NM, if I want to put 1 NM, then I will be putting 100 USDC because that's the current price of NM, right? That's how you put the equal amounts. And yeah, that's when your range is, well, your maximum and minimum are equally distant from the current price. Now, what happens if you put, say, a much higher range? Well, if you set a much higher maximum, let's say 140, then so that's the current price, and you keep the 90 as the minimum, then this part will be obviously much larger than this part. Sorry, I didn't draw it well, but this part will be 40 and this part will be 10, right? Then the ratio between the two currencies will be basically the ratio of these two differences. So this part will occupy 40 over 50. So 50 is the whole range, which is 80% of the value. And here will be 10 over 50, which will occupy 20% of the total value that you want to put in. So say, again, if you want to put 1 mm here, this value would occupy 80% of the whole liquidity value. So here you wouldn't be putting 100 USDC. Instead, you'll only be putting 25 USDC because this one 1 mm already occupies 80% instead of 50%. And so 20% will be just a quarter of the value of this basically. So which is 25 here. So you'll see that the higher your maximum, the more NM you have to put in. If we are talking about the NM pool, of course. And the lower the minimum, the more USDC you put in. Okay. And of course, on Uniswap interface, you just have to put one of them and you'll automatically calculate the other ones. But it seems like a lot of people aren't sure about how that is being calculated. That really depends on your maximum and minimum. It's not always 50-50. You only put 50-50 when you really think that it's gonna, well, it's equally likely to go both sides, and it's not gonna go a lot further on either side. Then that's what you'll be putting like that, which helps stabilize the prices, but it wouldn't really go anywhere. But as I said in the last video, if you want to provide support, then you would definitely want to extend your minimum to cover the lower ranges more so that essentially you'll make it harder for the price to drop through your ranges because you'll have to, well, people have to sell through all the USDCs you have. They'll be exchanging their NM with your USDC until you run out of your DC. And all the other liquidity provider also ran out of USDC at that specific range, then you'll continue to drop. Okay, so let me just also give you an example of what the support looks like, or let's just say a similar liquidity pool that I set up yesterday, the one I showed you. So again, if the current price is 100, what I did is I only set my maximum slightly higher than the current price. So for demonstration purpose, let me just say to 105. So that's plus 5%. And then the bottom, let's just say 60, which is much lower than the current price, minus 40%, right? Of course, it depends on how far you would think the price will slip through, and depend on how far you want your support to go. But let's just say it's 5% up and 40% down. Now, as you can see, this part is much larger than this part, right? So meaning you'll be putting you'll be putting a lot more USDC than your NM. This way, you also minimize the number of NM you want to risk putting in here. And I'll explain why, but just bear with me. So let's calculate the percentage of NM and USDC. So for NM, it's 5 over 45. So it's the percentage of the distance among the whole liquidity range. So 5 over 45, that would be roughly 11.1%. And for USDC, that will be 40 over 45, which would be 89.9%. Oops, 88.9%. All right. Now, if I want to put, say, I have 10K USD, then if I want to put 10K USDC here, what will my NM be? Well, this 10K occupies 88.9% of the total value. So here I would only be putting 1/8 of the USDC I'm putting in, because that's roughly 1/8. So that would be 1.25K worth of NM. Worth. Which is 12.500 divided by 100. So that's 12.5 NM. So if I set up the range like this, I'll be putting 12.5 NM with 10K USDC. Okay, now what happens if the price, well, let's talk about the worst scenario first, where you might be losing your NM, but you are not really losing it. It just got converted to USDC. So the worst scenario would be right after you set up this pool, then the price of NM skyrocket. So let's say it just went completely outside your range, let's say 150. So that's a 1.5 times increase, right? Which is a lot. So during the time where it increased from 100 to 150, of course, you still earn fees when it goes up from 100 to 105. So you earn some fees here. But after that, it goes completely outside, which means all the trades between here will not be interacting with the pool you set up, so you don't earn fees there. And during this part, what you'll be doing is you will be selling your MM here for the buyer's USDC. Okay, and you'll be selling at each point on the price curve until this point. So at exactly 105, you would have no MM left. They will all be converted to USDC. And because you'll be selling it on this smooth curve, so the average price you're selling will be the midpoint of the maximum, well, the midpoint between the maximum and the original current price, which is 102.5. So you'll be selling MM at 102.5 USD. So all this 12.5 MM will be converted to 1250 USDC, sorry, because that's the pair you set up. So you don't really lost anything. Oh, oops. What am I saying? It's 12.5 times 102.5, which is 1281.25. Yep. Okay. So yeah. So essentially, you are not losing anything because the total value is roughly the same, because you are just selling your MM for USDC, and if it goes down, you'll be converted back to MM through the same process. So that will be the thing you get after it goes above your range. So your pool will be consist of USDC only. So the original USDC you put and the USDC lockup that you get from the MM that was being exchanged during this range. Okay, and why do we say there is impermanent loss? Well, because theoretically, if you compare against someone who just holds this amount of MM and didn't put it into the liquidity pool, then the value of MM goes up as the price of MM moves up, right? So at this specific point, each of the MM will worth 12.5. Oh, sorry, worth each of the MM will worth 105. So 12.5 times 105 is obviously much greater. Well, not much, but will be greater than this, because if you set out the liquidity, you'll be selling on the smooth curve instead of the specific point here, right? So 12.5 times 105, which is one, oops, which is 1312.5 USDC. So you can see that the difference is not that big, but yes, if you just keep your if you pull out your liquidity pool exactly at this point, when it just gets outside of your range and you pull it out, you'll end up with the original 10K and 1281.25. But if you just have the 10K and the and if you sell at this point, then you will earn a slightly more USDC compared if you set up the liquidity, of course. Now, this is not it, because if the price keeps going up, then the value of NM here will continue to grow. However, because of this liquidity, all your NM got converted to USDC, so you do not possess this NM anymore. So that you are essentially losing the opportunity of your MM to increase further from your maximum, that is. So just to give you some number, if you instead keep the MM and sell at here, you would have obtained 150 times 12.5, which is 1875, which this number will grow larger and larger if you didn't buy back at when it goes outside of your range and you just keep watching it grow. However, you also have to know that this is the ideal situation. Sorry, I should say it would be the worst situation for liquidity providers. But you also need to know that this is not always the case. Like price could fall back and forth, so you will also you could also end up with more NM than USDC if it goes into this spot. And when it goes completely outside of your range, when it's completely below your minimum, you would end up with a bunch of MM with no USDC, because during this range, you'll be providing your USDC for their MM, basically. So it really depends on where the current price is when you want to pull out your liquidity pool, and you'll be pulling out a different ratio of MM and USDC, depend on that. All right, so yeah, that's basically the risk. And even with this risk, I still set up my liquidity pool because one, I do not mind this part at all, because I believe the price of MM will eventually goes up as the number of holders grows. So it is perfect fine if I'm buying MM as the price dips. So I'll be purchasing here, 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 here. And for example, I can just pull out my liquidity pool at this point. Then I'll be buying my MM at an average of, so if I pull out at 80, for example, I'll be buying roughly 5,000 USD worth of MM with average price of 90. Or if I just keep letting it run until it goes outside, then I will be buying at the midpoint of 160. So I'll be buying at the price of 80 per token. So if that it went through and then pull back my liquidity pool, then I would have a bunch of MM without me issuing multiple transaction to buy MM at each points. So in a way, it's also saving you fees, but of course, you will not be buying at the absolute bottom. You'll be buying MM as the price drops. So it's good, and it's also, well, it's not the best, but as I said, you can think of it as a buy order, and you can earn some fees while executing that order. Of course, there's always a risk where MM goes way below, but of course that's something you have to consider, because if you goes way lower, you will be holding MM where your purchase price will be here, right? You could have buy um, you could have bought a lot more MM at the absolute minimum before it bounce back, of course. But again, you will have to monitor the price 24/7. But liquidity pool, you still need to monitor the price, but if you set up a good range, you can just lie around for hours and then collect the fees when you are done with it. So I think that's pretty much all I want to say. Yeah, so if you do not want to lose your MM, there's one way you can do it, is you put the range slightly below the current price. That way, you are not offering any MM at all. You'll just be offering USDC, right? But the downside of that is you will not be covering the current price, right? And you wouldn't cover any higher price at all. So if the price just stays here or goes up, you don't earn fees, right? So if you really want it to start earning fees right away, then you would definitely have to put a very small percent of MM just right above the current price so that you are actually start earning, which I think is perfectly fine. But yeah, you wouldn't really want to risk off your MM, of course. And the more MM you put above the current price, they also act as kind of a resistance, because everyone have to buy all of your MM at the price you set up, the price range you set up, in order to break through that range. So I'd say the best case would be more people provide USDC behind the current price, and we keep moving with the increase of current price so that it's hard to drop but easier to move forward. And yeah,